While considering a new home purchase, my husband and I stumbled upon an astonishingly luxurious property priced over $3 million. Despite the steep cost, my father was willing to contribute toward the down payment. I was overwhelmed by the idea, especially given the extravagance of the home, which boasted a sprawling garden ideal for hosting gatherings. As we toured the property, my husband ventured out to inspect the garden, leaving me alone with the real estate agent. Suddenly, the agent hurriedly pulled me into another room, promptly shutting and locking the door. My heart raced with confusion and fear, especially with my husband outside. The agent, apologetic yet urgent, advised me to consider leaving my husband immediately. His alarming statement was followed by a revelation that left me stunned and contemplating a drastic decision about my marriage. On a different note, I am Lisa, happily living with my boyfriend of 2 years. Known as the perfect couple among our friends, we are both over 30 and contemplating marriage. As we discussed his last night out before marriage, he expressed his desire to enjoy one final evening with friends, which I supported with a smile, though I secretly hoped he wouldn't stay out too late. Lately, his frequent nights out have been a growing concern for me, reflecting a troubling pattern. Even when I propose plans for us, he often has excuses, either commitments with friends or simply feeling too tired or unwell. While I understand and respect his wish to enjoy his freedom before we tie the knot, it's hard not to feel sidelined. His persuasive charm often sways me, but the repeated cancellations are wearing thin on my patience. We need to find a balance between his social life and our time together, a challenge that is increasingly important as we move closer to marriage. Dealing with the pressure to get married as I approached my late 20s was tough. I felt an unspoken urgency, partly because many of my friends were tying the knot. Amidst this, I feared that being too upfront about my concerns might push my boyfriend away and endanger our plans to wed. Thus, I often kept my worries to myself, trying to maintain calm even when I felt disappointed. My boyfriend and I eventually found ourselves discussing our future together. He mentioned that if we decided to get married, my father was willing to help us with the down payment for a house. This news came at a time when I was yearning for security and the societal recognition that came with being married. It wasn't a grand romantic proposal, but the practicality of the arrangement made me happy because it meant we could finally move forward. We started looking at houses, and my excitement was evident as I brought home brochures for new properties. However, the homes we looked at were all priced over $2 million, far more than I had expected. My boyfriend reassured me that it was manageable, especially with my father's substantial contribution as a corporate executive. His words, although pragmatic, hinted at an eagerness that bordered on presumption. He seemed too comfortable with the idea of leveraging my father's wealth for our benefit, which began to trouble me. As we delved deeper into planning, his perspective seemed increasingly skewed towards finding the most luxurious properties, arguing that my father's financial stability and our combined incomes made it feasible. This shift in his demeanor, more focused on the financial benefits than our life together, made me uneasy. It felt disrespectful to my father, who, though financially well off, was still active and not merely a financial resource. My boyfriend's attitude seemed to imply that my father's money was more pivotal to our marriage than our relationship itself. This revelation was disheartening. I started to question whether his love for me was genuine or if it was overshadowed by his interest in my father's wealth. The man I thought I knew before our engagement seemed different now, more calculating and less considerate. It forced me to reconsider what I truly wanted in a partner, and whether this marriage, initiated under practical pretenses rather than romantic love, was something I still hoped for. The conversation about buying a house became a focal point for us as we contemplated future family plans and the need for space to care for my aging parents. My husband argued that a larger home would be essential for our future needs, emphasizing that his motives were not financially driven, but rather about ensuring we had a comfortable living space. His rationale seemed sound considering potential children and my parents' future needs. Despite this, I felt the need to involve my father in this significant financial decision. After all, it was his money that would be contributing a substantial amount towards the down payment. I reached out to him to get his thoughts on us looking at more expensive properties. My dad, ever supportive, reassured me with a smile, saying he was willing to do whatever made me happy, even if it meant buying a more spacious house. His easy demeanor made me wonder if I was overthinking the financial implications. However, my husband seemed to take my father's willingness as a green light to only consider the most opulent properties. He began showcasing homes that were well beyond what I considered reasonable, including one priced at $3 million. He reassured me there was no issue since my dad was ready to assist with the down payment, but the price tags were soaring to heights that made me uncomfortable regardless of my father's financial comfort. Realizing that my husband might not see the boundaries I felt were necessary, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I selected a few properties that aligned more with our actual needs and budget and planned to visit them right away. Home viewings under such circumstances were unusual, but necessary to prevent him from focusing solely on financially impractical properties. Since we got married, I noticed a shift in his attitude towards money. His approach had grown increasingly greedy, and he seemed to ignore the emotional and practical implications of our decisions. Moreover, his emotional responses had become unpredictable, and any critique could provoke an intense reaction, complicating our interactions. To keep things moving and under control, I arranged for us to view my chosen properties the next morning at 11 a.m. As I confirmed the plans with him, he mentioned stepping out for a drink with a friend, despite it already being late and our early start the next day. His plan to go out, knowing we needed to be up by 8 a.m., only added to my concerns about his current priorities and our future decisions together. Lately, I've been grappling with doubts about my marriage, and each day seems to amplify these concerns. My husband's recent behavior has been particularly troubling. He often acts without considering the consequences, a trait that wasn't evident when we were dating. These moments led me to question whether marrying him was the right decision. The next morning, as I feared, he struggled to wake up for our house viewings. Despite my repeated efforts, he remained unresponsive until it was almost too late. When he finally awoke, he was irritable and still reeking of alcohol from the night before. Since he was in no condition to drive and I didn't have a driver's license, we had no choice but to take the train, throwing our schedule into disarray. Despite the rocky start, as we arrived at the luxury property we planned to view, the atmosphere seemed to shift. The home was more impressive in person than in the photos, spacious and undeniably opulent. The tension between us eased momentarily as we admired the property's exterior. However, the real estate agent's demeanor was brisk and somewhat cold, which seemed unusual, though I had little experience with high-end realty to compare. As we began our tour, my husband was captivated by the large garden, ideal for social gatherings, and went to inspect it. Meanwhile, the agent abruptly pulled me aside into another room, locking the door behind us. My heart raced, confusion and fear overwhelming me. The agent, sensing my panic, signaled for silence before speaking in a hushed tone. "I'm sorry for this intrusion, but there's something urgent you need to know about your husband. You need to get away from him as soon as possible." Stunned, I could hardly process the words. The situation felt surreal, like a scene from a thriller, not something from my life. Before I could gather my thoughts to respond, the agent continued, "There's more to it. I have a friend who owns a bar on the San Diego Strip. I connected them with this real estate, but recently they've been dealing with a serious issue, illegal drug trafficking. It turns out your husband has been involved. We caught someone just yesterday." My initial disbelief turned to shock. Is my husband involved in criminal activities? It seemed impossible. He had always been ambitious, perhaps overly focused on money, especially after we got married. But I couldn't reconcile this image with the man I knew, who held a regular job and showed no signs of such drastic behavior. Yet, the agent's revelation was too detailed, too specific to dismiss outright. As fear mingled with disbelief, I realized I had to confront this new dark dimension to our life together, questioning everything I thought I knew about the man I married. Recently, my husband started carrying 3 cell phones, one for work and another for personal use, which seemed odd but not alarming at first. However, his behavior grew increasingly peculiar. Just last night, he suddenly decided to go out for a drink after he had already changed into his pajamas for bed. This erratic change made me start to wonder about his intentions. These doubts were magnified by a serious conversation I had with our real estate agent. During a tour of a luxury property we were considering, the agent pulled me aside and disclosed troubling news. They claimed that my husband was involved in illegal activities and even showed me some evidence to prove it. This revelation came just after observing my husband jovially discussing the house's features with the agent, making it even harder to believe that he could be involved in anything criminal. He was completely at ease, not at all like someone who was supposedly caught in a crime the day before. Driven by a mix of suspicion and the need for clarity, I decided to investigate further. That evening, I told my husband I was going shopping, but instead met with the agent at a cafe near the station. The agent reiterated their claim and presented me with photos as evidence of my husband's wrongdoing. The reality of the situation began to sink in. Why would he do this? Was it purely for money? Regardless of his reasons, I knew I couldn't stay with someone who had committed a crime. I confronted my husband at home later that evening. His casual demeanor, asking about dinner as if nothing was amiss, only fueled my resolve. "Enjoy your last meal in the free world," I told him bluntly, just as the police arrived at our door. The shock and fear were evident on his face as the officers explained the reason for their visit. Despite his protests, the evidence was overwhelming. As the police handcuffed him, he became desperate and grabbed a rod-like object, swinging it wildly. The police quickly subdued him, preventing any harm. It was a terrifying moment, realizing that the man I thought I knew could show such violence. His last words to me were a mix of confusion and anger, still not fully grasping the severity of his actions. "What's going on? Explain this to me," he demanded. But there was nothing to explain. The truth was clear and right in front of him. The ordeal was heartbreaking, but it was also a clear end to our relationship. I had to accept that I had been living with someone capable of deception and possibly violence, blinded by ignorance and greed. As he was taken away, I felt a painful mix of relief and sorrow, determined to move forward from this dark chapter of my life. After the dramatic and frightening incident with my husband, he was arrested and taken away by the police. At that moment, as I watched him being led away, I collapsed from the sheer relief and realization of the danger I had just escaped. It was a terrifying experience, especially when he charged at me aggressively. Thankfully, the police were right there to intervene. I called my parents immediately and they rushed over to support me. Their presence was comforting. "Are you okay?" my mother asked as soon as she saw me. "I've been better," I admitted, still shaken by the ordeal. My parents were deeply concerned and relieved that I was unharmed. We discussed the gravity of what had happened and how fortunate I was to have emerged from such a dangerous situation without physical harm. The reality that my husband could do something so drastic was shocking. We talked about the need to discuss the future, including divorce proceedings and what steps to take next. My parents suggested we talk with his parents to explain everything and decide how to move forward. When we met with his parents, I braced myself for a difficult conversation. However, instead of resentment or denial, they were apologetic and distraught over their son's actions. "We're so sorry our son caused this," they said, genuinely upset. They even brought an envelope which they hesitantly offered to me as a form of apology and compensation. "It's not much, but please accept this as a token of our regret for what he did to you," they pleaded, tears in their eyes. The envelope felt heavy, likely containing a substantial amount of money, about $300,000. I was taken aback. "Wait a minute, what's this about? I can't accept such a large amount of money," I protested. They insisted, explaining that it was the least they could do to make amends for the trouble their son had caused. Despite their sincere apology, it felt wrong to accept such a large sum from them. His parents were not to blame for his actions, and it was not their responsibility to compensate for his mistakes. "Thank you for your kindness, but as adults we must each take responsibility for our actions," I said, trying to ease the burden they felt. "If this money is to be a form of support, please let him repay you after his release. He should be the one to make amends." It was a complex situation, dealing with the fallout of my husband's actions, but it was important to ensure that responsibility was acknowledged appropriately. His parents agreed, appreciating the sentiment behind my decision. We all knew it was just the beginning of a long and difficult journey to rectify the damage done, but it was crucial to start it with honesty and accountability. It was with a heavy heart that I watched as my former in-laws grappled with their son's actions. They were genuinely apologetic and assured me they were committed to his rehabilitation. Despite their admirable parenting, it was unfortunate their son had chosen such a path. However, they assured me they would handle the situation diligently, and I chose to step back and leave it in their capable hands. Later, I learned he was sentenced to 5 years in prison for dealing in less severe categories of drugs. During his incarceration, I moved on with my life, hardly giving the past a thought. 5 years passed relatively peacefully, and just as I was settling into my new normal, his parents reached out again. They no longer apologized, but expressed a desire for their son to personally make amends. I agreed to meet him, not out of necessity, but as a gesture to facilitate closure. We arranged to meet at his parents' home, ensuring my current address remained private. When I saw him again, the years in prison had visibly changed him. He appeared older and worn. He apologized sincerely, kneeling without hesitation, a gesture that suggested genuine remorse. Yet, for me, nothing could undo the past. I had moved on. I advised him to focus on repaying his parents and making amends for his actions. His response was quiet and somber, and since that meeting, I've had no further contact with him. His parents keep me updated occasionally. He's now working diligently at a construction company, his wages managed by his parents to ensure his earnings go toward repaying his debts. Whether his remorse is genuine or not remains to be seen, but for now, he seems committed to a path of redemption. As for me, life has moved in beautiful new directions. I remarried, and my new husband and I, along with my parents, enjoy a harmonious and happy life together. We often travel and build lovely memories as a family. Of course, life is unpredictable, and challenges may arise, but I believe in supporting my partner as long as trust remains intact. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. Relationships might seem straightforward, yet they are intricately complex. My ex-husband's journey has been a tough lesson in the consequences of one's choices. As for me, I aim to live a life filled with pride and consideration for those around me, hoping never to repeat the mistakes of my past.